What truly happened when medieval newlyweds finally retreated to their chambers? Were these moments of private bliss, or something far more public and strange? From the 12th to the 15th centuries, the path to marital intimacy was often paved with bizarre customs that might leave you speechless. Number 1. The proof of consummation. The first rays of dawn, often gray and cold, would pierce through the narrow windows of the Lord's chamber, or perhaps the humble cottage, casting long shadows across the heavy furnishings or the simple wooden bed. For the new bride, this morning was not one for quiet contemplation or gentle awakening. Pressure was immense, a heavy cloak woven from centuries of tradition and societal expectation. All eyes, it seemed, across the entire village or the vast ducal estate were fixed upon this singular moment, this silent yet deafening declaration. Proof of consummation was not a private affair, but a stark, undeniable public display. And for the bride, it represented the ultimate passage from maidenhood to full wife. Custom, deeply rooted in the concept of a bride's virginity being central to her worth and the legitimacy of the union, demanded visible evidence. This evidence was typically sought in the form of a stained linen sheet, often the very sheet upon which the couple had lain during their wedding night. Process of verification, while perhaps not always involving a grand parade, was nonetheless a formalized ritual, a public checkmark on the marriage contract. After the initial bedding ceremony and the subsequent night of anticipation for all involved, the morning presented its own set of rituals. In many places, and particularly among the higher echelons of society, where alliances and inheritances hung precariously on the validity of a marriage, a select group of witnesses, often female relatives or trusted elder women of the community, their task was solemn, their expressions often grave, reflecting the seriousness of the occasion. They were not there for congratulations or pleasantries, but for inspection. Chamber door, perhaps guarded through the night by watchful servants or family members, would finally open. The newly married couple, still groggy from the previous night's festivities, or perhaps from the anxieties of their new state, would face these eager eyes. The object of their scrutiny was the bed itself. The sheets, usually freshly laundered and bleached to an almost stark white, would be carefully examined. If the marriage had been consummated and the bride had indeed been a virgin, a small yet significant stain of blood would be present. This single spot, often no larger than a coin, was the undeniable mark, the silent herald of a successful union. It was the key to unlocking the next phase of the marriage, paving the way for recognition, inheritance, and the all-important continuation of the family line. The moment of discovery was often accompanied by gasps, whispers, or even murmurs of approval. The witness or witnesses would then carefully remove the sheet from the bed, holding it up for all to see, or at least for the assembled company to acknowledge. This display, though simple in its execution, carried enormous weight. For the bride, it was a moment of profound relief, a public validation of her virtue and the successful completion of her duties. A wave of pride, mixed with lingering shyness, might wash over her as the women nodded in satisfaction. The groom, too, could breathe a sigh of relief. His honor confirmed, his new wife deemed worthy. In some traditions, the sheet would not merely be examined and put away. It might be presented to the assembled family or even to a wider community gathering, such as a breakfast or feast held later in the morning. Chroniclers sometimes noted instances where the sheet was paraded, almost like a banner of triumph, through the village streets or displayed from a window of the bridal home. This public display, while perhaps shocking to modern sensibilities, served as an irrefutable declaration to all who had witnessed the wedding, or even those who merely heard the rumors that the marriage was complete, lawful, and capable of bearing legitimate heirs. Such a display quelled any potential gossip, dispelled doubts, and solidified the couple's standing within the community. It was a clear, unambiguous statement. This marriage was real, and it had begun in the most traditional and acceptable way. If, however, the dreaded scenario occurred and no such mark was found, the atmosphere would shift dramatically. The silence would become heavy, fraught with unspoken accusations. For the bride, this absence could spell disaster. Her honor, her family's reputation, and even the validity of the marriage itself could be called into question. Suspicions of premarital indiscretion, or perhaps impotence on the part of the groom, would loom large. In a society where virginity was paramount, especially for women of noble birth, the consequences could range from a simple annulment to public humiliation, a forced return to her family, or in extreme cases, accusations of witchcraft or deceit. The stakes were incredibly high, making the morning after the wedding night a moment of profound vulnerability and immense social pressure. The weight of this tradition, while perhaps not always resulting in dramatic public displays, meant that the private act of consummation was never truly private. It was watched, anticipated, and finally judged. The little stain of blood on the sheet became a symbol of purity, lineage, and the successful continuity of the family line. It was the physical embodiment of a societal expectation, a silent yet powerful testament to a medieval marriage's beginning. The relief felt when the mark was found was palpable, a collective sigh of satisfaction that echoed through the halls and hearths of medieval life, confirming that all was as it should be and the path to future generations was clear. Number 2. The consummation, vigil. As the last light faded from the sky, taking with it the final strains of music and the dying embers of the wedding feast, a quiet tension would begin to settle over the bridal chamber. Public festivities, a whirlwind of feasting, dancing, and boisterous revelry, had drawn to a close. Now came the most intimate, yet paradoxically one of the most public adjacent moments of the entire wedding celebration. The consummation, vigil. This was not a moment for privacy in the modern sense, far from it. Instead, the wedding night, particularly its initial hours, was a carefully orchestrated affair, witnessed and affirmed by a select group of family and friends who held a critical role in ensuring the legitimacy and successful start. After the bedding ceremony, which often saw the newlyweds physically escorted and sometimes even helped into bed, the chamber door would not simply close on the couple and their newfound solitude. Oh no. Custom dictated that the witnesses, typically close family members, such as parents, aunts, uncles, or esteemed guests, would remain nearby. Sometimes they would linger just outside the door, their ears subtly attuned to any sounds from within. In other instances, they would retire to an adjoining room, perhaps still within earshot, or even take their seats in the main hall of the house, maintaining a respectful but expectant silence. The very air around the bridal chamber seemed to hum with anticipation, thick with unspoken hopes and quiet expectations. The purpose of this vigil was multifaceted. Primarily, it was to bear witness, however indirectly, to the successful consummation of the marriage. In an era when marriage was less about romantic love and more about alliances, property, and lineage, the physical act of consummation was legally and socially paramount. It made the union binding and provided the basis for legitimate heirs. Without it, a marriage could be annulled, leading to scandal, financial ruin, and the unraveling of carefully constructed social ties. The witnesses, therefore, were performing a vital societal function, their presence a guarantee against future disputes or claims of non-consummation. The atmosphere during the vigil could vary, depending on the personalities involved and the specific family's traditions. For some, it might have been a solemn, almost religious observance, a quiet prayer for the couple's fertility and happiness. For others, it might have been tinged with nervous anticipation, or perhaps a touch of hushed, playful banter among the more jovial relatives. There might have been whispered conversations about the day's events, reflections on the bride's beauty, or the groom's steadfastness, all carried out in hushed tones so as not to disturb the activities within the chamber. A cup of warmed wine or a small plate of dried fruits might have been offered to the watchful relatives as they settled in for the wait. The length of the vigil was not rigidly defined, but would generally last until a certain degree of confidence was established that the act had occurred. What constituted proof during the vigil varied. Sometimes it was merely the passage of a reasonable amount of time. Other times, a more direct sign was sought. Chroniclers and historical accounts, while not always explicit in their details, sometimes hinted at subtle cues. Prearranged signal, a discreet cough from the groom, or even a pre-agreed-upon phrase whispered through the door, might have indicated success. In some more extreme or anxious scenarios, it was not unheard of for family members to even inquire directly through the closed door as to the couple's progress, a level of intrusiveness that might seem utterly baffling today, but was accepted as a necessary part of ensuring the legitimacy of the union then. Pressure on the young couple inside the chamber was immense. They knew they were not truly alone. Every rustle of the bedsheets, every whispered word, every movement carried the potential to be heard, however faintly, by those waiting outside. This knowledge certainly stripped away any pretense of privacy and added another layer of anxiety to an already momentous occasion. For a young bride, perhaps unfamiliar with intimacy, or a nervous groom, the watchful presence of their families just beyond the door must have been daunting. The expectation was clear: complete the act. Once the witnesses were satisfied either by the passage of time or some subtle indication, they would quietly disperse. Collective sigh of relief, perhaps almost imperceptible, would ripple through the small group. Their duty was done. The marriage had been witnessed, blessed, and now affirmed. Path was clear for the couple to truly begin their new life together, albeit with the understanding that even their most intimate moments were, at least initially, a matter of public record and communal validation. The consummation vigil served as a powerful reminder that in medieval society, a marriage was not just a bond between two individuals. It was a cornerstone of the community, a legal contract, and a societal expectation, all of which needed to be publicly acknowledged and ritually confirmed. Number 3. The bedding ceremony. The wedding feast. A riot of roasted meats, sweet wines, and joyous music would reach its crescendo. Laughter echoed through the great hall, or the communal gathering space, and the air hummed with the celebratory spirit. But as the evening drew to a close, a new, more hushed excitement would begin to ripple through the assembly. This was the moment of the bedding ceremony, perhaps the most public and ritualized transition from the celebratory feast to the marital chamber. It was a procession, a performance, and a blessing, all rolled into one, signifying the official transfer of the bride and groom into their new shared life. The custom pervasive across various social strata in medieval Europe saw the wedding guests, often led by the parents of the bride and groom or other respected elders, physically escorting the newlyweds to their bed. This was no quiet, discreet retreat. It was a boisterous, sometimes chaotic, and utterly public display. The procession might begin with the bride, often still in parts of her wedding finery, being led away from the main gathering by the women of the family, her mother, aunts, and bridesmaids surrounding her. They would help her shed some of her outer layers, perhaps her elaborate gown or heavy mantle, preparing her for the intimacy that lay ahead. Simultaneously, the men would attend to the groom, stripping him of his doublet and heavy boots, reducing his attire to something more suitable for bed. The journey to the bedchamber itself was part of the spectacle. Procession would weave through the castle corridors or the crowded cottage, often accompanied by playful jests, teasing remarks, and sometimes even more ribald humor. Guests might throw nuts or grains at the couple, symbolic of fertility and prosperity, or perhaps even small pieces of cake, hoping to gain some of the wedding's good fortune. Musicians might play lively tunes, adding to the festive atmosphere, even as the destination became more intimate. The sounds of merriment mixed with the rustle of clothes and the shuffle of many feet would fill the space. Upon reaching the bedchamber, the ceremony would intensify. The room itself, often decorated with fresh flowers, fragrant herbs, or even specific tapestries for the occasion, would be the focal point. The bed, sometimes a grand four-poster draped in rich fabrics, or a simpler yet comfortable pallet, would already be warmed and prepared. The attendants, often a mix of family members and close friends, would then actively assist the couple in getting into bed. This was not a mere passive observation. The women would help the bride into her nightgown, perhaps a simple linen shift, while the men would do the same for the groom. Hands would reach out, adjusting pillows, pulling up blankets, and ensuring the couple was comfortably settled. As the couple lay in bed, often looking a mixture of shy, excited, and overwhelmed, the ritual would continue. The room would still be filled with onlookers, their faces a mixture of smiles and curiosity. Prayers and blessings would be offered over the bed, invoking divine favor for fertility, a harmonious union, and many healthy children. Guests might offer toasts, holding up cups of wine, wishing the couple a fruitful and happy future. Jokes, sometimes quite explicit in nature, might be exchanged, reflecting the frankness of medieval society regarding procreation and marital duties. The atmosphere was one of joyful expectation, yet also deeply rooted in the practicalities of marriage and the continuation of the family line. In some traditions, a piece of wedding cake or bread would be offered to the couple in bed, symbolizing the sharing of sustenance and the intertwining of their lives. The act of eating together in the bed, surrounded by their guests, further solidified their new status as a united pair. This was not just about getting them into bed. It was about publicly acknowledging their new status as husband and wife, marking the point at which their physical union was expected, and indeed encouraged. The bedding ceremony served several critical purposes. Firstly, it publicly acknowledged the moment the couple was left alone, ensuring that the marriage was seen to begin properly, provided witnesses, not necessarily to the intimate act itself, but to the couple's transition to the marital bed, adding another layer of legitimacy to the union. Secondly, it was a symbolic act of blessing, an invocation of good fortune and fertility. Finally, it was a practical matter. In an era where privacy was a luxury, and homes often housed many people in close quarters, the bedding ceremony ensured that the couple was given their moment, however public its inception, to begin their marital life together. Only after these rituals were complete, after the blessings were given, the jokes told, and the last toast offered, would the guests finally begin to trickle out of the chamber. With a final wave, a knowing smile, or a last whispered piece of advice, the door would swing shut, leaving the newlyweds at last to their much-anticipated privacy. The sounds of the departing revelers would slowly fade, leaving behind a profound silence, broken only by the beating of two nervous, excited hearts. The bedding ceremony was over, and the wedding night, truly, had begun. Number 4. The bridal stocking toss. The revelry of the wedding feast had softened into a more intimate, yet still lively atmosphere within the bridal chamber. The bedding ceremony had just concluded, leaving the newlyweds settled in their bed, perhaps still a little shy but undoubtedly relieved that the most public parts of the day were behind them. But before the assembled guests would finally withdraw, leaving the couple to their much-anticipated privacy, one more ritual of playful chaos often ensued: the tossing of the bridal stocking. This was a boisterous, often hilarious custom, steeped in superstition and good wishes, and it served as a final burst of communal merriment before the door finally closed. The tradition centered on the stockings of the groom, and sometimes, most famously, the bride. After the couple had been helped into bed, or while they were still being settled by their attendants, the stockings would be removed. The groom's men or the bride's maids might playfully snatch them, or they would be handed over by the newlyweds themselves. The goal was for guests to toss these stockings, sometimes one of each, over their shoulders towards the couple in the bed. The direction in which the stocking landed, or whether it landed on the bed at all, was believed to hold prophetic significance for the thrower, particularly regarding their own marital prospects. The room would be filled with eager participants, usually single men and women, vying for their turn. A buzz of anticipation would fill the air as each person took their stance, often with their back to the bed, ready to hurl the stocking. Laughter would erupt as a stocking went wide, perhaps hitting a wall or a piece of furniture, eliciting good-natured groans from the thrower. Cheers would follow when one landed squarely on the bed, indicating, according to folklore, that the thrower would be the next among the company to marry. This added a layer of competitive fun to the ritual, encouraging lively participation from everyone present. The symbolism behind the stocking toss was rich with medieval beliefs about luck, fertility, and the transference of good fortune. Stockings, being intimately worn garments, were seen as carrying the essence of the wearer. By touching the bridal bed or even landing on the couple, they were thought to absorb some of the wedding's potent marital bliss and fertility. For single guests, catching or successfully tossing a stocking was akin to catching a bouquet today, a direct infusion of the wedding's special magic into their own lives. It was a tangible piece of good luck, something to be cherished in the hope that it would hasten their own journey to the altar. The stockings themselves, often made of fine wool or linen, sometimes even adorned with simple embroidery, would become temporary projectiles. The physical act of throwing them, the slight weight and feel in the hand, added to the visceral nature of the game. The atmosphere was one of joyful abandon, a release of the structured formalities of the day into a more informal, playful chaos. Even the most stoic guests might find themselves drawn into the cheerful competition, eager to test their luck and see if the prophecy of the stocking would favor them. For the newlyweds, observing from their bed the stocking toss was a final, heart-warming spectacle. It was a testament to the community's affection and goodwill towards them. The laughter, the playful shoves, and the shouts of encouragement or mock despair filled their chamber with a comforting din. It reassured them that their union was celebrated, supported, and welcomed by their social circle. Despite the intrusion into their impending privacy, the ritual was perceived as a blessing, a final communal act of good wishes before they embarked on their shared life. As the throwing subsided and perhaps all the single guests had had their turn, the stockings would be retrieved often by the couple themselves or by a helpful attendant. Sometimes, the groom might playfully present his stocking to his new wife, or the bride might present hers to her husband, a symbolic exchange of their individual identities now intertwined. The stockings might then be folded and placed aside, perhaps as a keepsake of the night's playful start. Finally, with the last stocking retrieved and the last prophecy made, the guests would begin their departure. The noise would slowly dwindle, replaced by the hushed goodbyes and the soft sounds of retreating footsteps. The door would finally close, leaving the newlyweds in silence, save for the lingering echoes of laughter and the warm glow of the hearth. The stocking toss, with its blend of superstition, humor, and communal participation, was the last hurrah, a final blessing flung with joy and hope, setting the stage for the intimate moments that were to follow. It was a spirited end to the wedding day, a memorable transition into the private space of the marital chamber, imbued with the hopes and dreams of all who witnessed it. Number 5. The garter snatching. Amidst the boisterous energy of a medieval wedding, before the grand procession to the bridal chamber, there often existed a more daring and energetic custom that blended playfulness with a hint of risque behavior: the snatching of the bride's garter. This was not a delicate prearranged removal, but a lively scramble, typically involving the male guests, all vying for a piece of the bride's intimate attire. It was a tradition steeped in superstition, believed to bring powerful luck and fertility to those who managed to acquire a fragment. The garter, a simple band of fabric used to hold up the bride's stockings, held immense symbolic power. It was an item of clothing worn close to the skin, positioned near the very source of life and fertility. For medieval minds, objects that had touched the body of a new bride, particularly one still deemed a virgin, were imbued with a special potency, a tangible link to the blessings of the union and the promise of new life. Therefore, acquiring a piece of the garter was seen as a direct conduit to this good fortune, a charm against barrenness, and a herald of one's own impending marriage. The moment for the garter snatching could vary. Sometimes it occurred during the height of the wedding feast, amidst the dancing and general merriment. The bride, perhaps still in her wedding gown, might be surrounded by eager bachelors. In other instances, it might take place as the wedding party began its procession towards the bridal chamber, adding to the chaotic energy of the bedding ceremony itself. Precise timing often depended on the local customs and the specific family's tradition, but the intent remained the same: to get a piece of that coveted garter. The scene would quickly devolve into a good-natured, yet determined, scrum. Male guests, often fueled by ale and a spirit of competition, would surge towards the bride. Their goal was to lift her skirts high enough to expose her leg and with swift hands attempt to sever or remove a piece of her garter. This was no polite request. It was an active, sometimes physical pursuit. The bride, for her part, might feign resistance, giggling as she tried to protect her modesty, or she might willingly participate in the playful chase, understanding the tradition's significance. Her bridesmaids or female relatives might form a protective circle around her, adding another layer of playful obstruction to the pursuit. The atmosphere during the garter snatching was charged with excitement and laughter. Shouts and cheers would accompany every successful grab or near miss. The men would jostle and elbow each other, their eyes fixed on the target, determined to be the lucky recipient. The bride's blushes and the groom's amused expressions would add to the spectacle. It was a moment that brought a raw, earthy humor to the often formal proceedings of a medieval wedding. A brief interlude of uninhibited revelry. Once a guest successfully secured a piece of the garter, whether a small ripped fragment or an entire length, they would often hold it aloft in triumph, their victory celebrated by cheers from their companions. The fragment was then carefully tucked away, perhaps into a pocket or tied around an arm, to be kept as a powerful talisman. Belief was that carrying this piece of the garter would bring them good fortune, hasten their own marriage, or even bless them with fertility. For those who were already married, it might be kept as a charm to ensure the continued prosperity of their own union. The garter snatching, while seemingly a rather crude act by modern standards, was firmly embedded in the communal understanding of medieval life. It was a public acknowledgement of the bride's role in perpetuating the family line and a way for the community to partake in the potent, life-affirming energy of the wedding. It also provided a moment of release, allowing for a brief suspension of social strictures in favor of playful chaos and superstitious fervor. The bride's modesty, though seemingly compromised, was understood to be done so in the spirit of tradition and good luck, rather than disrespect. This ritual highlighted the frankness with which medieval society viewed sexuality and procreation. It was not hidden behind closed doors, but was openly acknowledged and celebrated, even in these slightly wilder forms. The garter snatching, therefore, was not merely a game. It was a potent act of communal participation in the magic of marriage, a wish for continuity, prosperity, and the joyous proliferation of life. As the final piece of garter was snatched, or the playful pursuit finally ended, the wedding party would begin its winding path toward the chamber, leaving behind the lingering scent of revelry and the satisfied sighs of those who had secured their lucky charm. Number 6. The Charivari Serenade. Even after the wedding feast had wound down and the newlyweds had finally retreated to their chamber, the sounds of celebration often continued to ripple through the medieval night. This continuing commotion, far from being a simple, quiet farewell, was often a raucous, sometimes jarring tradition known as the charivari. Cacophony of noise, often involving pots, pans, rough instruments, and boisterous voices. The charivari could be anything from a playful serenade wishing the couple well to a mocking punitive demonstration, depending on the circumstances of the marriage. The charivari, a term derived from French but with equivalents across much of medieval Europe, was a communal assembly making loud, discordant noise. It often involved villagers or townspeople gathering outside the bridal home, sometimes armed with whatever they could find to create a racket. Tin kettles, rusty bells, wooden clappers, hunting horns, or simply their own shouting voices. Imagine a group of people, under the cloak of night, intentionally producing the most unpleasant and unsettling noise possible. This was the charivari. The intent behind a charivari varied widely. In many cases, especially for a first marriage that was well received by the community, it was a jovial, if noisy, blessing. The noise was intended to ward off evil spirits, to frighten away bad luck, and to ensure the fertility and happiness of the new couple. It was a boisterous expression of communal joy and acceptance, a final emphatic cheer for the newlyweds as they began their private life together. In this context, the noise was not meant to be disturbing, but rather a protective and celebratory din. The sounds might have been punctuated by shouts of good wishes, playful chants, and perhaps even crude, good-natured jokes about the wedding night. However, the charivari could also take a far more sinister and mocking turn. It was frequently used as a form of social control, a communal expression of disapproval for marriages that went against established norms or offended local sensibilities. This was often seen in cases of unequal marriages, such as a large age gap between spouses, or a marriage between a wealthy widow and a younger, poorer man. It could also be directed at remarriages, especially those that occurred too soon after the death of a previous spouse, or marriages deemed morally questionable. In these instances, the noise was not protective but punitive, intended to shame the couple, to make their wedding night a deeply uncomfortable and public ordeal. Tools of a punitive charivari were often more jarring and persistent. Broken pottery, rough drums, and dissonant singing would be used. The noise sustained for hours, sometimes even over several nights. The participants might accompany their racket with crude effigies of the couple, satirical songs, or even mock rituals, all designed to highlight the perceived impropriety of the union. Targets of such a charivari would find themselves besieged by the clamor, unable to find peace or privacy. The relentless noise served as a constant reminder of the community's displeasure, a powerful form of public humiliation that could only be quelled by the couple or their families, offering some form of appeasement, perhaps a payment of money, a round of drinks, or a feast for the noisy mob. For the newlyweds inside the chamber, the experience of a charivari could range from amusing to utterly terrifying. If it was a good-natured serenade, they might have simply tolerated the noise, perhaps even found some humor in it, knowing it was a sign of community goodwill. They might have even offered a small treat or drink to the participants to encourage them to disperse. But if it was a hostile charivari, the noise would have been relentless, designed to pierce through the thickest walls and disturb the deepest sleep. The humiliation would be palpable, the weight of communal censure pressing down upon them. They would be trapped, unable to escape the audible manifestation of their neighbors' disapproval. The charivari reflected the tight-knit nature of medieval communities and the powerful role of communal opinion in shaping individual behavior. Marriage was not just a private contract. It was a public affair with significant implications for the social order. When those implications were perceived to be negative, the community felt it had the right, even the duty, to voice its disapproval, and the charivari was one of its most potent tools. It was a raw, unfiltered expression of popular sentiment, a demonstration of collective power that could enforce social norms far more effectively than any written law. As the night wore on, whether the charivari was celebratory or condemnatory, it would eventually fade. Participants would disperse, their voices hoarse, their makeshift instruments put away. Profound silence would descend upon the bridal home, perhaps leaving the newlyweds in a state of exhaustion, relief, or lingering shame. The charivari in all its noisy forms served as a stark reminder that even the most intimate moments of a medieval wedding were deeply intertwined with the expectations, beliefs, and watchful eyes of the wider community. Number 7. The bed warming. As dusk settled over the medieval landscape, bringing with it the pervasive chill that seeped into stone walls and thatched roofs, a practical yet curiously intimate ritual often preceded the arrival of the newlyweds in their chamber, the bed warming. This was not merely about ensuring comfort in often drafty and cold medieval homes, but also carried subtle symbolic undertones, a gentle preparation of the space for the union of the couple. Medieval castles and homes, despite their grandeur or simplicity, were often notoriously cold. Heating systems were primitive, relying mostly on open hearths and fireplaces, which struggled to warm large stone rooms. Beds, often grand affairs with heavy curtains or simple wooden frames, could feel like icy tombs when first entered, especially on a winter night. Thus, the practical need for warming a bed was very real. Before the bride and groom were formally led to their sleeping quarters, servants or younger members of the household, often children or unmarried youths, would be dispatched to perform this duty. Chosen bed warmer would enter the chamber, which might still be lit by flickering candles or the dying glow of a small fire. Their task was straightforward: to lie in the bed for a period, generating warmth with their own body heat, making it cozy and inviting for the newly married couple. Imagine a young page, perhaps no older than 10 or 12, carefully climbing into the vast cold bed, pulling the heavy blankets around themselves, and patiently waiting for the sheets to absorb the chill. Or a young chambermaid diligently pressing her hands against the linen, moving across the bed's surface to distribute the warmth evenly. This act, while primarily functional, was not without its subtle symbolic weight. Person warming the bed was in a way blessing the space, imbuing it with a sense of comfort and readiness. There was an unspoken understanding that this act prepared the bed not just for physical warmth, but for the intimate union that was to take place. The bed, after all, was the central stage for the consummation of the marriage, the place where new life might begin. Ensuring its comfort was a small yet significant step in setting the scene for a harmonious beginning to the couple's physical relationship. The process might involve more than just a person. Sometimes, heated stones wrapped in cloth, or even bedpans filled with hot coals, would be placed beneath the covers for a short time to banish the damp chill before the human warmer took over. However, the human touch was considered essential, providing a more even, natural warmth. The bed warmer would remain in the bed for a set period, perhaps a quarter of an hour or longer, until the sheets were no longer frigid to the touch. For the bed warmer themselves, it was a small but important chore. For a child, it might have been a source of quiet excitement, a fleeting moment in the privileged space of the bridal chamber, perhaps glimpsing the wedding decorations or the special preparations. For a young servant, it was simply part of their duties, a practical contribution to the running of the household and the smooth execution of the wedding rituals. There was no direct intimacy involved, simply the transfer of bodily warmth to the cold linens. Once the bed was deemed sufficiently warm and inviting, the bed warmer would carefully extract themselves from beneath the covers, smoothing the sheets and plumping the pillows. They would then quietly leave the chamber, ensuring everything was pristine and ready for the bride and groom. Timing was crucial. The bed needed to be warm enough to be comfortable, but not so warm that it became stuffy, and the bed warmer had to depart well before the wedding party arrived for the bedding ceremony. This simple act of bed warming spoke volumes about the practical realities of medieval life. It highlighted the constant battle against the elements, the ingenuity required to make life comfortable, and the collective effort involved in preparing for significant life events. It also subtly underscored the importance of the marital bed, not just as a place of rest, but as a consecrated space for the continuation of family and lineage. The warmth transferred by the bed warmer was a physical manifestation of care, a small comfort offered to the couple on the cusp of their new shared life. As the final guest departed the main hall and the procession for the bedding ceremony began, the bed awaited, no longer cold and daunting but welcoming and soft, silently prepared for the intimate moments that were to follow.